So today we're going to talk about the development of the religion of Islam and then ultimately its spread from Arabia to other parts of the world. To begin our understanding, we want to make sure we're good with the geography of the region. This is what's known as the Arabian Peninsula. Today, most of the Arabian Peninsula is the country of Saudi Arabia. This is the Arabian Peninsula, and that's where Islam will be born. Arab people originate from the Arabian Peninsula. Today, Arab people are from throughout the Middle East. But that only happened because the Arabs of Arabia eventually, with their religion, spread out of Arabia. So Arabs originally originated in the Arabian Peninsula. Before the birth of Islam in the 7th century, Arabia, there's not a lot going on there. Not a lot going on there. You've got it kind of nestled just to the south of two important empires. You've got the Byzantine Empire to the north. We'll talk more about them later, but that's the continuation of the Roman Empire. The Byzantine Empire in the north. And then you've got a Persian Empire led by the Sassanid dynasty to the northeast. And in Arabia, not a lot happening. There is, within Arabia, it's mostly desert. This area here is known as the Empty Quarter, the Rub al-Khali Desert. You don't need to worry about that too much. Just know that most of Arabia is desert. And for most of human history, there is not anything really going on in the heart of Arabia, in the center of Arabia, in that desert. It is a passing land, a thoroughfare, a way to get from point A to point B for like camel caravans and such. So there are some trade routes that will head across Arabia from maybe the Indian Ocean to the Red Sea. But there's not really a lot of settlement at all inside the heart of Arabia. Today that would be very different. In fact, the capital of Saudi Arabia is right in the center of the Arabian Peninsula. Because what has happened to the Arabian Peninsula over the last century? Yeah, the discovery and the exploitation of oil in Arabia has developed the deserts of Arabia more than they ever had before. With regard to that, most of the population of Arabia lives in an area of Arabia known as the Hijaz. You don't necessarily need to know that word, but just hear it, the Hijaz, which is this border area of the Red Sea. And within that region, you've got a city called Mecca. And Mecca, today we use the word Mecca to describe like a destination for people for any particular topic. Like if you are a big baseball fan, if you love baseball, not only the game that's played today, but the historic game, what do you think would be the Mecca for baseball fans? Like where do baseball fans that love the history of the game, where must they go at some point in their lives? Probably Cooperstown, New York, where the Baseball Hall of Fame is, right? So Cooperstown is a Mecca for baseball fans. Mecca is today the Mecca for Muslims. We'll talk about some beliefs of Islam in a few minutes, but all Muslims within their life must make a pilgrimage to Mecca. And so Muslims literally go to their Mecca, which is the Mecca. All right? Yes, sir. Well, I mean, they can take a plane to Saudi Arabia, and then when they take part in the Hajj, they do some walking. But we'll talk more about that in a little bit. So Mecca today is the Mecca for Muslims. Before Islam, though, Mecca was also an important trading post, an endpoint on trade routes. And within Mecca, there was a religious shrine known as the Kaaba, right? Kaaba. I did it again. I did it again. Known as the Kaaba. It's this big black cube that houses a meteorite. And pre-Islam, this was a religious shrine where the various believers of Arabia would go and worship their various polytheistic deities. All right? So you would go to Mecca if you were like a traveler or a trader, or if you were a religious pilgrim. Don't think buckles everywhere and turkeys on Thanksgiving. A religious pilgrim. We call those pilgrims because they came to the New World in search of religious freedom and a new place to practice their faith. So a pilgrim in general terms is anybody who's making a journey for religious purposes. So Mecca became a destination point for various believers in Arabia to go and worship their deities. Yes, sir?
So what's in the box?
A meteorite.
A meteorite.
A meteorite.
So can you go in the box or is it not?
You don't go in. You don't go. I'm sure someone's been in at some point and the construction of it, but yeah, you don't go in.
Dang, how old is that meteorite?
Well,
What's the box?
a couple thousand years old. Yeah.
Isn't that the stone that Muhammad was at or something?
No.
Yeah, why so?
It isn't. What's the origin of the belief? Do you guys have any connection, understanding of that? Like where the origin of the importance, like Islamic interpretation of what's actually the importance of that spot of the Kaaba. Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, really, it's an area to make, like, the pilgrimage is, like, there's a series of steps that
Yes.
you have to take to, like, do it. And it's sort of like an historical importance because we follow, like...
Just the symbolic route that Muhammad made back there.
Like, we imitate that, like, something that
Yeah.
the important figure in Islam did.
We'll talk later about a shrine in Jerusalem called the Dome of the Rock, and that actually has some important significance in that it's believed by Muslims that rock, that the Dome of the Rock is built around, is where Muhammad ascended into heaven from. But here, this is just a historic significance of Muhammad's return to Mecca. We'll talk about this in a few minutes.
Yeah,
So-
I just don't understand why this cube, why this Kaaba,
Yeah.
was important to Islam and was important to other
Because it was important to religious believers. And Muhammad, upon his return there, we'll talk about this in a few minutes, wanted to make it important for Muslims, because Muslims were going to replicate Muhammad's journey there. Yes, sir?
Google says the Kaaba was built around the sacred black stone, a meteorite that Muslims believe was placed by Abraham and Ishmael in the corner of the Kaaba.
Okay, so they're connecting it to the original prophets as having importance. All right. Arabia, going back to our map, Arabia is quite multicultural. The majority of people that live in Arabia are from what we call Bedouin culture, B-E-D-O-U-I-N, Bedouin. These are nomadic peoples that will, be traveling from place to place, taking their goats from here to there, and not really setting up a settled, civilized culture like we've talked about in other parts of the world. These cultures are based on clan relationships and tribal relationships. And this deep connection with your family and your clan makes any kind of greater organization of an Arabian society very challenging. Because it's not, no one in Arabia looks to like all Arabians as like one. You would look to your clan or you would look to your tribe as your familial connections. So we don't have any kind of semblance of an actual state like we would see in other parts of the world at the time. In addition to these Bedouins who might practice their polytheistic beliefs, you've got within Arabia, by the time of Muhammad's life, you've got a lot of Christians, because Christianity is going to be spreading for centuries after its birth. You've got a lot of Jews, and the Jews are going to end up in Arabia ever since the diaspora began in 70 CE. Some Jews are going to spread down and live in Arabia. So you've got a lot of different religions coming in contact with each other. The ruling family of Mecca is a tribe called the Quraysh, Quraysh. The importance of recognizing that is to understand that that ruling tribe is going to be making a lot of money in Mecca because all of these travelers are making their way in to worship their gods. And so their livelihood is in large part because of this religious shrine and people from all over Arabia, Bedouins from Arabia, coming to worship there. Because when they go, they stay in hotels, and when they go, they might have to pay duties to get in, and they eat at restaurants. And so they're bringing a lot of wealth into this ruling tribe. Yes, ma'am? Yeah, sure. It was an important center point for travelers and tourists. Yes.
I feel like that's kind of, I just don't feel like that's right, because if you're if you're like charging people, okay, fine. Like if for the hotels and for the services like that, I can understand. But you're actually charging people to go into this place. That's just that I don't think that's very.
Well, hey,
I just don't think it's
right,
very moral
right,
either.
and
Pay money to get a visa?
yeah, I mean,
I just don't think it's very moral.
well,
People are-
it is what it is. It is what it is, and people, when finances are concerned, sometimes morality is dropped aside.
Well, this
All right,
means
now-
that, like, not all people can make the pilgrimage.
Sure, yeah, but just like today, not all Catholics can afford to go to visit Rome, and not all Muslims can afford to go on the Hajj. It is what it is. Especially today, it's far more expensive because when this happened, when Islam is born, everybody lives within a stone's throw from Mecca. But now, people live on the other side of the world. It can be very challenging. But anyway, yes, ma'am? Your mom just did it. Oh, excellent, excellent. Excellent. Now, this was so she was there at the, like, there was some rough things going on while she was there. Yeah, that's so today there are so many hundreds of thousands, millions of people that go on this pilgrimage to Mecca called the Hajj every year, and that there have been countless stories over the years of just massive crowds and sometimes something happening to cause a little bit of a panic or something, and people being trampled to death, and just a horrible situation. And in this year, one of the worst episodes of violence, one of the worst tragedies to come out of it happened this year. We press on to a guy named Muhammad. And Muhammad was a real guy, and we need to remember that Muhammad was a real guy. So there is nothing in one's belief system that has them say, I believe Muhammad was a guy. You don't have to believe. He was. He was as much of a guy as me or anybody else in this class. The same is true for Jesus of Nazareth. Jesus was a real historical figure. There's no like belief system that's required. One can say, I believe Jesus was the Son of God, or not. Someone can say that. But one cannot say, I don't believe Jesus existed. Same token with Muhammad. One can believe that Muhammad is the final prophet of God, but one can't believe that Muhammad wasn't a guy. We have enough historical record to say he was there. All right? So, that said, Muhammad was a guy. And in Muhammad's life, as he is coming up, he essentially becomes a trader, a merchant. And through his early life, he would travel throughout much of Arabia. And through these travels, he's going to come into contact with a lot of different Bedouin clans. He's going to come in contact with Christians. He's going to come in contact with Jews.
Could you repeat that? Contact
He comes in contact with everybody in Arabia. Christians, Jews, various Bedouins. And maybe we can draw a similarity to him and someone like Siddhartha Gautama, who eventually gets disgusted with the lavish lifestyle that he is allowed to live, yet that still didn't bring him happiness. And he casts all that aside to search for this enlightenment, and he becomes the Buddha. Maybe a similar story for Muhammad, who is traveling throughout Arabia, and he sees, he's going to sometimes travel as far north as the Byzantine Empire. And he can see that organization of that empire. But in his culture in Arabia, you don't have any type of organization like that. These various clans and tribes can't get together. They can't unite into anything stronger than what they are. And he also comes in contact with other religious traditions, and some of them being monotheistic traditions. So it shouldn't surprise us that when Islam comes along, Muhammad obviously will be building on some of these previous traditions that he would come in contact with. In the year 610, Muhammad receives the first of many revelations, which would be, according to Islamic belief, revelations imparted to Muhammad from an angel reciting the words of God. So God is communicating to Muhammad through an angel, and Muhammad hears it, and Muhammad is now tasked with sharing this word. And Muhammad starts to reveal these revelations to others. And he will start to grow a small following. Now, long after Muhammad's death, these utterances of Muhammad, which are really the words of God through Muhammad to his followers, will eventually be written down in book form, and that book will be known as the Quran. But this doesn't come around until a couple decades after Muhammad actually dies. Now, as Muhammad hears these proclamations that there is only one God, and that God is Allah, who is one of the gods that people in Arabia already worshipped. But these revelations to Muhammad said that there is only one God and all the others should be cast aside. This, you can imagine, is threatening to the ruling family of Mecca. Because the ruling family of Mecca is making a lot of money having people come in from all over Arabia to worship their various gods. So much like the story of Jesus, and where Jesus was threatening the ruling dominant beliefs of Jerusalem, and Jesus was ultimately cast aside by those religious leaders. Much like that, Muhammad himself is going to become persona non grata. He is not going to be wanted around. And the Quraysh family, the Quraysh tribe that is in charge of Mecca, they want Muhammad gone. Because if Muhammad is allowed to win the day, if Muhammad's new ideas are allowed to win the day, and all of a sudden you can only worship one God anymore, well, what happens to all those pilgrims that want to make their way to Mecca? They might not go anymore. And so the ruling family of Mecca feels threatened by this. And they're going to get rid of Muhammad. So in the year 622, this is the ding 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 year, put a star by this year. In the year 622 of the Common Era, Muhammad and his small group of followers are going to flee away from Mecca. They are getting out of town, because if they don't get out of town, what's going to happen to them? They're going to get killed. They leave the city of Mecca, and they go to Medina. So here is Mecca, right here, and Medina is a good distance to the north. It doesn't look that far on the map, but remember, in the 7th century, that's a good hike. So they're going from Mecca, and they go to Medina. Yes, ma'am? Medina in Arabic means city. Really. And my understanding is, even the city named Istanbul is just the city in Turkish. So anyway, yeah, so we're naming the city the city. How about that? I don't know. So Muhammad makes his what's called flight from Mecca, which is known in Islamic tradition as the Hijrah. Hijrah. The Hijrah. Hijra, pardon me. This becomes year 1 of the Islamic calendar. Remember, calendars are totally arbitrary, right? We already talked about how BC, before the Common Era, before Christ, Jesus was actually born in 4 BC. Jesus was born before Jesus. So years are totally arbitrary based on the guy that originates the calendar or the civilization that adopts that calendar. So Islam, the Islamic calendar, their year 1 is the year 622 in the Common Era. So while today it's the year 2015, on the Islamic calendar, I think it's I don't know my math, but 1437 or something like that. Because they're 622 years behind the standard calendar. Yes?
And with countries like Iran, where they have Muslim, Islam as their main religion, would their calendar be different from ours?
I would imagine they're probably using as their primary calendar the Islamic calendar, but then they might have in parentheses the year that everybody else is using. We use one called the Gregorian calendar by a Pope Gregory. But it's based on Christianity. Based on Christianity. All right. So in 622, they take the Hijrah. They get out of Mecca because in Mecca, if they stay, they're going to die. And they go to Medina. And in Medina, this is where Muhammad, he's going to continue to have revelations while he's there. But he grows his following, all right? He grows his following. And he begins to organize his followers into what is known as the Ummah. Ummah. U-M-M-A. Begins to grow his followers into the Ummah. This is a concept within Islam of an Islamic community that transcends family ties. So if you are a member of the Ummah, it doesn't matter like what clan or tribe you're affiliated with. This is bigger. Because Muhammad has this goal of uniting Arabia in a way that it had never been united before. And so the Ummah that he builds, it's going to start to replace clan and tribal relationships within the followers of Islam. Now, this doesn't mean that everybody, or even going forward, all Muslims will forget their clan and tribal relationships. No. But this was Muhammad's original goal, to try to transcend the division that previously existed within Arabia. And that's important because if you're creating, think about what Muhammad is eventually going to do. He's going to create what will become one of the biggest empires in the world based on his original beliefs. Well, what's the first thing you have to do to create a unified empire like that? You have to get the people to want to come together. Well, what better way to get the people to want to come together than to create this belief system that within your new religion, clan and tribe don't mean as much as being a community of these fellow believers. So if he can erase it, and then he's going to want to one day go back to Mecca. And in Mecca, the Quraysh tribe wanted to out him. They wanted to destroy him, get rid of him. Well, if he can convince them, or some of them at least, that they can be with him and be a part of this community that transcends their tribe, that might be good in the long run. Yes, sir?
So the Ummah, like how it was, how they united them, isn't that kind of like how it shows that there was the essence to like unite the people?
Yeah, a way to unite the people, yeah. I think, so much, we talk about Qin Shi Huang Di and what Qin Shi Huang Di does to unite people. The development of this religious supported community of believers that transcended the divisions of the people, that's big time. Everybody good? In the year 632, which will be Muhammad's last, he will return to Mecca. And this is where it's on. Because obviously he had to leave Mecca because of the threats of violence against him. Well, now he's got a pretty large following that grew over the last decade. And he leads his followers. Muhammad is at the same time as he is the leader of a new religion, he is also the leader of an army. All right? And so this is one distinction that we're going to be able to draw between someone like Muhammad and someone like Jesus. Muhammad was a leader of this faith, as seen as the last prophet of God, but he was also the leader of this military that he had grown, that has now got to make its way back to Mecca, and they're going to throw down with the leaders of Mecca who don't want him. And by 632, Muhammad has grown, and his Ummah has grown to such a place where they can actually win that battle. So Muhammad returns to Mecca, and this return of Muhammad to Mecca is what is commemorated every year as Muslims make their Hajj. And we'll talk about that more in a minute, this pilgrimage to Mecca. So when Farah's mom did the Hajj, she's following the same footsteps that Muhammad and his followers did 1,400 years ago. So it's commemorating that event. So Muhammad and his followers will wage battle against the leaders of Mecca, and they win, and they go to the Kaaba, and those artifacts and those religious idols for all those other polytheistic beliefs, they're all destroyed and cast away, and now Mecca will become a center for religious worship for Muslims exclusively. And that's where we look at this image here today. This is a picture of a modern Hajj, and it may be difficult for you to make out, but these are all people that are bowing down and praying. Okay? And obviously, tens of thousands of people bowing down and simultaneously praying. And you will notice that every single one of these people is facing the center stone, right? And around the world today, in any mosque that is constructed around the world, they all are situated as such to have the prayers facing Mecca. Or when Muslims would pray inside their home, regardless of whether they're praying in Indonesia, the country that has more Muslims than anyone else in the world, or if they're praying in suburban Detroit, Michigan, Muslims will pray facing the direction of Mecca. All right? And so we notice what we have there. It doesn't matter who you are within the Islamic community or where you are. Muslims in Indonesia are doing the same thing that Muslims in southeastern Detroit are doing, because their Islamic faith unites them and transcends any kind of national identity or anything like that. All right? Everybody good? Now here's one kicker. Muhammad dies in 632.
Natural causes or actually?
I think he just died. Just his life. Yeah, it wasn't war. When was he born? I don't think I have any born. He was born. I think he was like 60-something when he died. Yeah, but Muhammad dies. And here's like a smack my head moment, because man, history would have been a lot different had he done. What's that? 632 he died. What year was he born? I want to say 589 is ringing a bell. 579?
577.
577? Oh, you're just guessing? Okay.
He guesses all the time.
All right.
Oh, born approximately in 570.
Approximately in 570. So he's a 60-some-year-old guy. All right. Muhammad dies. And we're going to be able to compare this to a lot of other civilizations we'll talk about this year. He doesn't have a son, number one, because that might have made things easy. He doesn't have a son, nor does he name his successor before he dies. And this is problematic. And much of the rift in the Islamic world today stems from this issue of Muhammad dying without naming a successor to him. Who is the next guy that is going to lead the faith and lead the state? And here's a weird thing, so within Islam. If we remember when Christianity was born within the Roman Empire, right? But there was never a notion at that point of a Christian state. This was, in its earliest days, just a new branch sect of Judaism, right? So at one time, you had like spiritual leaders of Christianity, but they were separate from like the political leaders of the Roman Empire. In fact, what did Jesus himself even have to say about the notions of the Caesar in Rome versus the spiritual beliefs? Anybody know? Yes, sir?
He was talking about taxes, I believe.
Yeah?
Instead of pay to politically, and he was trying to separate between political and religious.
He separated them.
So he said obey whoever's whoever's face is on the coin, and then follow the person.
You want to add to that, Ms. Brown? Yeah, render unto Caesar what is Caesar's. So we get this notion very early within Christianity of a separation between a political entity and a religious entity. And that's going to be used differently by different empires at times. We're going to sometimes bring that together in the Christian world. We'll talk about the Byzantine Empire in a bit. But from its birth, Muhammad, as the leader of Islam, is at one time the leader of the faith, and at the same time the leader of the state. And this creates, in the followers of Muhammad, those leaders that will come after him. And man, Muhammad didn't name anybody because that would have made everything too easy for history. This creates a new title that we're going to call a Caliph. A Caliph. Caliph. And this is the spiritual and political leader of the Islamic State. And these Islamic states that will be developed, we can call them, rather than calling kingdoms because they're not being ruled by kings, or empires because they're not being ruled by emperors, we're going to call them caliphates.
So what are they rulers of?
Excuse me?
So what
Political and religious, political and spiritual authority in one guy. Yeah.
About Muhammad not having a son, did he ever marry, or was
Yes. Oh, yeah. He was married. Yeah. Married. He had 4 wives, I believe. Yeah.
Why did the older wife get the throne as a queen?
Because it's Arabia, man. There's like the most patriarchal society in the world. Come on. No. Yes. It would be like if the priest was also, or it would be like in Catholicism, if the Pope was also the king. It's putting the spiritual leader and the political leader together into one position. This is the Caliph, all right? You guys, if you follow our current news, what goes on in the world today, this ISIS group out of Iraq and Syria, their goal, what they purport to be doing, is to be building a new Islamic state, a new Islamic caliphate, where just like 1,400 years ago, the Islamic world was led by one political and spiritual leader. They have designs to do the same thing today, rather than having all these distinct national boundaries and everything like that. So, after Muhammad's death, we're going to have the establishment of the caliphate. Yes, ma'am?
So the caliphate is the state of...
It's the Islamic State. But I don't want to get too into calling it the Islamic State, because I don't want you to think ISIS necessarily today. This is like the beginning of a political entity based on the religion of Islam that was led by a spiritual leader and a political leader in one position called the Caliph.
So the caliph is the person.
The Caliph is the guy.
Okay.
Yes.
Then is, like, for example, Iran and Ayatollah Khomeini the caliph and...
Yeah, kind of, but that we're going to talk about the whole split in their beliefs as to who should be leading. So that's a good segue back to where I want to go. Hannah.
So the caliph is the guy, the caliphate is what?
The king is the king, the kingdom is his empire. The caliph is the political and spiritual leader. The caliphate is what you call his empire, his state. Okay? Yeah. All right, everybody good? Sweet. Before we press on into the political issues, all right, and the issues over not choosing the successor, I want to spend our few minutes before we go away to lunch talking about some core beliefs of the religion of Islam. Islam believes that there is only one God. Not that there is like one supreme God, but there's only one God. And that God is Allah, which is just the Arabic word for God. A-L-L-A-H. Muslims believe that Muhammad is Allah's final prophet, the last human being that was communicated to by God.
So they still accept like other prophets like Abraham?
Other prophets, previous prophets are accepted, and in fact Jesus is considered within Islam a prophet of God.
So he's still kind of
So he's still absolutely respected, but not revered as a god. Because in Islam, there's only one God. So there can't be two. Yes?
So like I know in the Bible, like they prophesied that Jesus was gonna Muhammad was gonna So did they like prophesy that Muhammad was gonna be like was that like how it was? Like Muhammad was a thesis of Islam?
You know what, I don't know enough to say that there were any kind of prophecies. But remember, the Quran that is eventually written, these dictates from God, whereas when Christianity is born, there was already an Old Testament to the Christian Bible, the Jewish Bible already existed. There was no Quran before Muhammad. All right, so Muhammad is his final prophet. The Quran is the book of all of these revelations, the compiled revelations of Muhammad. Now remember, we already mentioned that this was not actually compiled. I think it was not until 650 that the Quran was actually put in book form. Prior to that, these were oral recitings.
So why was it recorded?
Because it was not meant originally to be recorded. It was meant to be uttered. It was meant to be spoken. But ultimately, it was written down. Because you can imagine, like, you know, maybe think of the telephone game and what could happen to to the message if it was just an oral tradition passed on year after year after year. It might start having to have some distortions. So it was first written down in the year 650. In addition to the Quran, there's another important document within Islam called the Hadith. Hadith, the Hadith. And these are the sayings of Muhammad. So they're not coming from the Hadith. Quran is like from God. The Hadith is Hadith. The Hadith is from Muhammad. With the idea that like good Muslims should try to live their life as Muhammad said to live. So the Hadith gives you those examples. Yes, ma'am.
The thing with the Hadith is that like Muhammad himself didn't write them. Is that they're like kind of like secondary sources, and you have to be careful and make sure because some Hadith you can't trust. Like you have to make sure that they're valid.
There might be distortions over the years. Okay.
Certain people that you like you trust, like oh, it's said from this person. That's a secondary source.
So we have a similar thing to Confucius and the Analects, where they're going to be put together by the followers of Confucius, not necessarily Muhammad himself.
Yeah, I don't know why Muhammad decided to record everything. Like he just wants it, has it done orally. Just orally, like if you're trying to transfer something down orally, it's not really reliable.
And that's where one's beliefs come into play. So reliability does not necessarily matter when one's beliefs come into play. All right. A mosque for Muslims, and here is just one. A mosque for Muslims is a religious house of worship. Does anybody know what mosque this is? This one's in, yes sir?
Is that one in Istanbul?
It's the one in Istanbul. It was at one time the biggest church in the world, the biggest Catholic church essentially in the world. But when Istanbul became Istanbul, when the Byzantine Empire fell to Muslim empires, this was reconstituted as now the biggest mosque at the time. It's called the Hagia Sophia, Hagia. We'll talk more about it, Sofia. And it's in Istanbul.
Is it still really large?
Well, it hasn't shrunk. Yeah, it's still very big. But it has been converted. It's been converted to a mosque. Interestingly enough, and we'll look at this in a little bit, as it had been converted, and for much of the last century, it's been more of a tourist destination. It's not. I don't think it's used today as a actual mosque. It's a historic artifact in Istanbul. But when it was made, it's 1,500, 1,600 years old. When it was made into a mosque, the problem was the center point of this church was, of course, because why would it have been, was of course not centered on Mecca. So it didn't direct the prayer of the practitioners to Mecca. So when it became a mosque, they had to slightly tilt it off kilter because everybody had to pray towards mosque. So the center point of the church was not towards Mecca. They had to twist it a little bit to make it fit for Islam. But anyway, to the Islamic state's credits that would rule to the Ottoman Empire that would rule this city for 500 years, they didn't destroy it. They recognized the greatness of what this building was. They just converted it and turned it into a house of worship for Islam. Now, one thing they did do is they constructed these pillars. And these should give you a clue that what you're looking at is a mosque. These are called, anybody? No. There are 5 of them, and that's good. But these are minarets. These are called minarets. And a minaret is a tower that we will often see around mosques. And historically speaking, especially before the time of amplified sound, when we can just put big speakers out there, before the time of amplified sound, you would have a guy called a muezzin, you don't need to worry about his name, who would go climb up to the minaret and make the call to prayer. And he would call out to the town around this mosque the call to prayer and recite the prayers every day for Muslims. Yes?
Could you repeat the name of this place?
That is the Hagia Sophia, Hagia, or Hagia Sophia, some people say. Sofia. Hagia Sofia. Okay, Muslims practice what are known as the 5 pillars of Islam. You don't need to memorize the Arabic words for these. Muslims practice what are called the 5 pillars of Islam. We talked with Judaism and Christianity, how Jews consider themselves God's chosen people. And as such, there's not really an easy conversion process to Judaism. And because of that, Judaism today is a really tiny, tiny religion in terms of how many people belong. Whereas Christianity has grown to be the biggest religion in the world because it's really easy to become a Christian. All you have to do to become a Christian is start going to a church. And poof, you're in. The doors are open. In fact, they probably have on their marquee outside of the church to come on in. Anybody, come and pray with us. Islam is much the same. It's not hard to become a Muslim. What one has to do to become a Muslim is what's known as shahada, a declaration of faith. You have to make a proclamation or a declaration that there is only one God, and that is Allah, and Muhammad is his final prophet. So if you believe that, if you can accept that, you get to be a Muslim. That's it. So that's how you start a religion in the 7th century of the Common Era, and by today, the 21st century, it has pushing 2 billion people in it, because it's relatively easy to convert. In addition to that, there's 4 other pillars that Muslims should adhere to. One is prayer. Muslims are to pray 5 times a day. Another is charity. Muslims are to give a portion of their wealth to charitable givings.
Number 3 is charity.
Yeah. I don't know, is there a particular order that is adhered to?
Not a particular order, but that Arabic word is fasting, not
Psalm?
Skipped over to the 5th one.
I know I did.
I'm just saying for the
Yeah. So I hopped over to zakat, the charity. My bad.
So you said the second one was pray 5 times a day.
Prayer, charity. One must fast during the holy month of Ramadan. To not eat during the daylight hours.
How do you spell Ramadan?
Ramadan. To not eat, to fast, to like sunrise to sunset. You don't eat. And this has made for some interesting stories. In our community, we have Dearborn, Michigan. Dearborn, Michigan is the home to the largest Arab population in the world outside of the Middle East, in Dearborn, Michigan. And so the high schools in Dearborn, Michigan are high schools just like here, obviously, and they play football in the fall. And so during football season, depending on when Ramadan specifically falls, that can be a big challenge for these players because, one, they're like teenage boys who already consume a ridiculous amount of food just to sustain themselves. But now they're teenage boys playing this really physical sport. Well, from sunup to sundown, they can't eat. So you've had the football teams in Dearborn, for example, sometimes trying to work around Ramadan and the fasting provisions, like practice early in the morning or practice later in the evening. But sometimes you can't mess with game schedules, and it's very difficult. And you have these kids that are going to play a game if it falls during Ramadan where they haven't eaten before a game. It can be very difficult. They have other advantages built in, though. Like most of them can speak Arabic. And when they're playing teams that don't speak Arabic, that can be a little tricky. And literally, when I used to teach at Stevenson, we hear stories of the Dearborn football teams announcing their plays in Arabic. Right up to, they can go right up to the line and announce their plays. Unfortunately, they didn't always account for like the random Arabic kid or Chaldean kid that could speak Arabic on the Stevenson football team. So that didn't always work. Yes, sir.
We scrimmaged sports in high school.
Oh, excellent.
And they were calling out all their plays in Arabic.
Did you have anybody? Nah. Yeah. Yes.
My great uncle, he worked in like Saudi Arabia or something
Okay.
during Ramadan, and he said he always felt really bad eating his lunch because all the people around him couldn't eat.
It's got to be tough. Yeah, I know for students it can be a tough slog making it through the day. Yes, sir.
But then you can only eat after.
And then after sundown you can eat. Now, can I ask you a question, Farah and Arslan? Can I ask you a question? Within Ramadan, like when the sun goes down, can you just go to town and go crazy, or are you supposed to still be reserved, like what you eat?
Some people do that where they you know, like see how other people feel when they go like have that much food to eat.
Gotcha.
So like if you're going crazy, you're sort of like
Defeating the purpose. Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
Like,
Gotcha.
Yeah, so,
Gotcha.
like, I don't, like, what's the background of this? Like, what was Ramadan?
You know, can we hold off on that for just a moment? I've got one more thing to get to, and then I'm going to send you guys off to lunch, right? Shh. We talked about the creed, the prayer, the fasting, and then there's the pilgrimage to Mecca. The pilgrimage to Mecca. At some point during a Muslim's life, they are to go to actually retrace the steps. I'm going to take a break right there. We'll come back after lunch.